Hey everyone, Mr. Happy here and welcome back to Elden Ring Builds. In this series, we take a look at a variety of builds to showcase the many different ways to get through the lands between. In our pilot, we looked at a bow build, and in the comment section I saw a request for something I was actually already thinking of doing, a shield build. And no, not Carrion Retaliation. I mean, choo-choo, here comes the Pain Train shield build. 2 shields, at once, in my hands, let's go. So for which shields I wanted to use for this build, I had a huge number of choices, small, medium, large, different effects, block properties, but there were a few that I landed on as must-haves. The first must-have shield for me was the Jellyfish shield because of its action, Contagious Fury. This is a flat damage buff that lasts for about 30 seconds so long as the shield is wielded in 1 or 2 hands. This means that two-handing a different weapon would indeed cancel out the buff, noted by the jellyfish turning from red back to its normal color. This made it ideal for damage buffing and meant we didn't have to invest too much into it unless we did plan to occasionally normal attack with it. I did on occasion, so I did upgrade it throughout the game, but not as much as my second shield choice. Now for the primary offensive shield, this choice was a lot tougher. There were shields I wanted to believe would be good choices, like the Visage shield or the Coil shield, but the unique actions were too slow and sacrificed all of the protection a shield would normally give. There were some small or mid-sized shields with bleed on them, but I wanted to go bigger. Finally, I landed on the Spiked Palisade shield. We all know bleed is good, and then I cold enchanted it so I could proc both frostbite and bleed, giving me a double burst of damage that would also lower enemy damage absorption. Seemed like a good choice. The Spiked Palisade shield can be obtained early on too. The intended method to get it is to head into the Siofra well in Mistwood and exit on the other end with a Stone Sword key. This puts you in Caelid, and the shield is then just to the west, past all these ruined centipedes, directly under the first Colossus Archer you see. However, you can skip Siofra well altogether if you head to Caelid first. Take the trap chest in the Dragon Burnt Ruins, and then go right after exiting the Celia Tunnel. This leads up a path with a large crystal and a big ball that you can just completely ignore at the end. By jumping carefully up the vines in the side of the ledges as you see me do here, you can actually climb up the cliff to where Siofra well would have dumped you in Caelid. Just mind the giant rune bear you need to run past first. You don't want to die to him after jumping up here. Another shield I looked at was the Fingerprint shield. This isn't obtainable until about the halfway point of the game, deep under Laendel's capital after defeating a few major bosses. It has insanely high block properties, high base damage, and can inflict the Madness status, which stuns and deals a percentage health of damage. However, Madness doesn't proc on a lot of bosses, so while it could be useful for clearing out humanoid enemies you may encounter, I wasn't all too concerned about that. I still picked it up and upgraded it, and I used it on enemies that were immune to status effects. Again, it having a higher base damage made it good for stuff like that. Or I could leave it as is and utilize its super high block properties as an actual shield. That definitely came in handy on a few bosses. The big thing for this build is to give the Spiked Palisade shield and or the Fingerprint shield the Shield Crash Ash of War. This is obtainable from a teleporting Teardrop Scarab in Laendel, and it allows you to charge forward with your shield in front of you, dealing multiple hits of damage ending with a big shield slam. This makes for easier bleed and frostbite proc since it hits multiple times. It can also easily stagger a lot of foes, even if they have moderate poise, and actually blocks damage at the cost of your stamina if you're hit during the charge. By using the Cold Enchant on my Spiked Palisade shield, we do weaken its block properties, and if you were to do that for the Fingerprint shield, it would do the same. So it means you're really using it to incur trades more often than outright ignoring opponent damage. If you leave the Fingerprint shield without the Cold Enchant though, like I said, its block properties are really good, so I actually did that for the most part of the game. Now one important note, if you're dual wielding the Jellyfish shield plus one of the other offensive shields, ensure your primary offensive shield is actually in your left hand. We can two-hand the Jellyfish shield or put away the left-hand shield to use Contagious Fury. Then we can use Shield Crash with the left hand thanks to the fact that we're using shield, so it's going to prioritize our left hand action. This prevents the Jellyfish shield buff from dissipating by putting it away or two-handing the main weapon. Now there are some other shield choices that I'm sure some of you are wondering about. I decided to avoid the giant cannon one since I wanted this to be, again, more like an actual shield build, but there's definitely some other choices out there that you may find better. Maybe one of the smaller shields that also has bleed on it as well. Onto your armor, anything with high poison defense without incurring too much weight should work fine. I used a mix of the Lionel set and my base armor at the start of the game without really too much trouble. The The white mask headpiece, when you can get it, is useful for any boss susceptible to bleed, since it'll boost your attack power whenever you're nearby anything that suffers blood loss. There are some other armor pieces with okay effects, mainly headpieces, but honestly so many sets work fine here. Now, Talismans ended up causing me a few headaches because for some reason I thought that charge attack Talismans would work since I'm using a charge with the shield. But no, that's not how it works. That means the attack that you charge up before actually swinging would get a boost, not attacks that persist when you hold the button. So this narrowed down my options quite a bit, but fortunately there are still plenty of good Talismans. The Jar Talismans from either killing Alexander early or holding out until near the end of his questline are both really good, being damage increases to shield crash. Consecutive hit talismans also work well with shield crash, so grabbing the one from Stillwater Cave in Liurnia or the ones later on from the Millicent questline definitely are recommended. The Godskin Cloth also works for extra healing if you're looking to turn those trades we talked about earlier into gains, again from consecutive hits. The rest are all flexible. The Great Shield Talisman can help reduce stamina losses from your blocks during shield crash, the various health and endurance related ones don't hurt, and increasing load or FP helps ensure more frequent charges. I made the Carrion Filigree Crest a staple, reducing my skill cost so I can more frequently buff with the Jellyfish Shield and charge with the Palisade or Finger Shields. As a bonus, consider grabbing an incantation seal that scales a strength, such as the Beast Seal. For some time, I was using Fire's Deadly Sin to not only deal more damage while standing near opponents, but also as a source of fire damage to dispel my own frostbite procs on enemies. By using fire to dispel an active frostbite, I can then reapply it shortly after, dealing another big burst of damage and sometimes stunning as frostbite does. This worked okay for the mid game, but a lot of the later game bosses made it nearly impossible to utilize it effectively, whether it be the idea of reapplying it mid-fight or actually staying on the offensive long enough to achieve the desired effect. Not to mention the investment of 19 faith to use the actual spell is not the greatest thing. Another small and quick shield with a fire enchant would work as well, just for the quick swap and bop to dispel the frostbite, assuming you have the endurance to wield it. I also considered Iron Jar aromatics as well as some of the other perfumed items, but man, farming the materials for these just sucks, so I backed off that real quick. If you don't mind farming them and you don't mind fat rolls, this might just give you an edge if you're seeking to trade non-stop with opponents, thanks to the reduced damage and increased poise. Just don't use it on any enemies that use lightning or anything you're going to actually want to use a light or medium roll against. Finally, your Physick. You have a decent number of options here, thankfully. It will be a while before you get the one you really want, the consecutive attack damage tier in the consecrated snowfields, so it's best to stick to some old favorites beforehand, and honestly maybe even after you can get to the consecrated snowfields. The Opaline bubble tier for the shield is never bad, and I used the FP cost reduction as soon as I could get to the ulcerated tree spirit in Mount Gelmir. That helped with the steep summon FP cost of Tish in the late game, and it didn't hurt with the first Jellyfish shield buff in the fight either. Alright, so early game. I started as a hero for the high strength, and the other melee values are also pretty good. We want to grab the Jellyfish and Palisade shield ASAP, so we'll need 20 strength and 14 dex in order to properly dual wield. Consider grabbing the Morningstar from the Weeping Peninsula to help with Grail, who of course, we're going to go eliminate ASAP with a Goldfowl Foot. On our trip to kill Grail, we can also detour to pick up the spiked Palisade shield. Again, the jumping isn't too precise, but you're probably going to fall off a number of times. Not that falling off here is lethal, it's really just a small fall. So just give it a try until you manage to actually scale the side of the cliff. Grab the shield, go kill Grail, and ensure that you get the stats to at least enough to wield the Palisade shield, just the 20 strength. Probably grab some endurance as well. You're definitely going to need that because, well, holding two shields can get very heavy, especially with the fingerprint shield. Also, grab the half of the Dectus medallion from Fort Ferrith, and if you want to use it, Radagon Seal as a talisman option. With this, we can head back to Fort Height to grab the other half of the medallion, and then Liurnia to grab the Jellyfish shield. Ensure to be picking up regular smithing stones for your Palisade shield and somber stones for your Jellyfish shield all along the way. Unfortunately, because we have two smithing stone shields, you're going to need a lot of smithing stones for this once you get the fingerprint, but getting the plus 12 or plus 15 on your first shield early shouldn't be too bad. I should probably make a regular smithing stone video to accompany this at some point, huh? Now head up to Landell and grab the Ash of War. The area is quite dangerous early on, and the Scarab just teleports to terrible locations. I'd recommend grabbing the Erd Tree Hill Gazing Grace just below the cliffside. Then jump up the back of these ruins, and then with a fast weapon, jump through the window and R1 swing at the Scarab. If you don't kill it, descend and try again, instead of trying to chase it all around the ruins. The last thing we need is the Glintstone Wet Blade. This is available in a room after the first boss of Raya Lucaria, so if you want to beat the doggo early to go get it, be my guest. After beating the doggo, head out into the courtyard and over to the left, where you'll see some broken stairs that lead up to a bunch of Glintstone sorcerers and a few other enemies. There should be a room that you can run into, and then on the corpse hanging over the ledge of the balcony, you can grab it and just get out of there. With these components, you just need to pick up talismans as you go. The Carrion Filigree pickup early helps a lot, as does the Wing Sword Insignia from Stillwater Cave in Liurnia, though the Poison Ground in the boss room should be noted. For the Carrion Filigree, either meet Ronnie for the first time or complete the early steps of Blide's questline to get Iji to actually sell it for 5,000 runes. Now, as you progress, contemplate your other talisman pickups. Anything that increases load health or helps with your FP are worthwhile options. When you get to Lanedel's Underground and find the catacombs, you can get the talisman from the final boss, which will actually give you the same effect as your white mask, and even stacks with it. This just gives you so much more damage after a single bleed is inflicted, though any boss that can't be bled will warrant a talisman change. Once the setup is done, you can go around and beat everything at your leisure. Grabbing a good summon helps a lot as well, so I always recommend Oleg, Mimic Tear, or the obvious Tish. Tish is always a good choice, and with shields as our primary weapon, probably the best choice we're going to have. If you don't mind blocking a lot, you can let Tish do a lot of the work in some of these fights, as is true realistically in almost any build. I tried Stormhawk Dean for a bit just to get the bonus attack, but I found myself wanting as I progressed through the mid game and into the late game. It just wasn't enough for me. If you play more defensively, consider summons with more offense, and vice versa. In the early game, with a bit of hunting down smithing stones, my damage output and defense were both pretty effective. Thanks to Shield Crash actually blocking hits and the high posture breaking elements of the Ash of War, I could swiftly deal with most bosses, taking slight damage trades. This was at times necessary because Shield Crash is not exactly a fast skill, and once you're committed to it, you're committed to it. Luckily, a lot of early to mid-game bosses were incredibly susceptible to me breaking their poise, or bleed, or frostbite, or all of the above. And then some enemies like the Crucible Knights were quickly stunned and dispatched, especially with the added frostbite procs. Towards the later parts of the game though, my advantages started to diminish at least a bit. More bosses immune to some status effects, faster and more agile bosses, and the slow nature of the weapons meant for more tactical play. Jump attacks to force stagger so I could use Shield Crash became more common, and putting away the Jellyfish Shield so I could use both my Spiked Palisade Shield and Fingerprint Shield at the same time without going into the fat rolls became an ideal strategy for some bosses. It felt a lot more like a normal playthrough, I guess, which I suppose when you're only using shields as a weapon is a pretty good thing. I mean, I'm not trying to be overpowered here, I'm just trying to get through with this particular build. That being said, the few places where the shield shined, it shined super well. Loretta, especially the Halig Tree Loretta, being briefly staggerable and then abusing Shield Crash's block to find more openings just made it so much easier than it has been in other builds. And then even Malenia's susceptibility to bleed and frost made for huge bursts of damage on her. Though the occasional wake-up kick or waterfowl was still a problem if I'm already committed to a Shield Crash, it just took getting used to the fight and probably about an hour of practice. Even against some of the really late game bosses like Radagon and the Elden Beast, I had very little issue, especially thanks to Tish as my summon. I'd say my biggest frustrations all game were probably Moog the Omen, not susceptible to anything. The AI for some reason is just messed up in that fight, and he's just got some really annoying attacks. You have the Lich Dragon, and I'm not going to lie, Shield Crash was not good to use against any dragon. I just had to abandon it entirely, so dragons in general, other than maybe Placidusix or whatever his name is. And then also learning how to safely fight Malenia with the shield, even though I think I had some advantages there, that was still kind of tough. So I think those were probably my 3 toughest points throughout the game. So the pros of the build, definitely its accessibility. While there are quite a few components, none of them are too difficult to get, and the results speak for themselves pretty quickly. All invasion NPCs or humanoid NPCs in general were mostly harmless. Heck, anything I could knock back or down was mostly harmless, and that included some bosses amazingly. And despite a few rough spots, a lot of bosses just couldn't deal with the constant charges I was dishing out. If I couldn't do that, using the Fingerprint Shield's high block percentages meant I could play more safely if need be, which was another great advantage to have. Now for the cons on the other hand, I'd say it shares the same cons with more traditional weapons in the game. You know, enemies or bosses that aren't susceptible to status effects are always harder in this game, and the speed of the weapon makes slippery opponents a bit more problematic. The endurance requirement to run this build effectively can also be quite high, and FP consumption can get very excessive, especially if you whiff a lot of attacks. All that being said, I'd give this build another 8 out of 10. When it's working, you'll have evil laughs it's working so well. And when it isn't, you'll just need to play more traditionally, even if the shields don't feel as intuitive to use as traditional weaponry. And with that, that's going to be a wrap for our second episode of Elden Ring builds. If you enjoy this series, be sure to like, favorite, subscribe, and definitely share it with people if they're wondering if these playstyles work in the first place. If you have any recommendations in the comment section, I do take a peek at those to get ideas for my next builds, and while I have some ideas already, I'm always looking at things and maybe I'll change my mind. Anyway, thanks again, I'll see you all in the next video, and until then, take care.